Yeah. So, good morning to all of you. Today we will, as part of our current affairs discussions, we will look at foreign policy. What are the factors that determine foreign policy? What has been India's foreign policy since independence? And the recent problems, especially Indo-China and Indo-Nepal or Indo-Pakistan. We will see those things and we will try to come out with our own solutions also. Before going into all this analysis, we must remember that there is so much of material that's coming on in the newspapers in recent times. At the end of the day, from our civil services point of view, you have to answer only 4 questions in your general studies paper 2, polity governance paper. 2 in section A and 2 from section B. That means 10 plus 10, 20 marks, and then 15 plus 15, 30 marks. So overall 50 marks. And out of these 4, if you go by the pattern of UPSC since 2013, 2 questions are always related to international institutions. Out of these 4, 1 or 2 questions are related to international institutions, the functioning of international institutions, whether it is IMF or World Bank or United Nations or BRICS Bank or you name it, all those multilateral institutions. And 1 or 2 questions are always related to India and its neighbors. And the rest of the 1 question can be any current affairs events. So we should be very careful, because the big mistake committed by students is reading unnecessarily too much. So we should be very careful while unnecessarily reading so much of study material. So what is it? Let us look at some of the theoretical aspects of this foreign policy and how India's foreign policy has evolved over a period of time, especially since independence. What has been the counters of this foreign policy, what it should have been and what it is at this point of time. So whenever we talk about this foreign policies, as Kautilya says, it should always be dominated by self-interest. As being one of the most pragmatic political philosophers, Kautilya had no qualms, no pretensions, and no hallucinations. He was very, very pragmatic, not an idealistic thinker. He said that it should always be dominated by self-interest. And that is what we must remember also. There are neither permanent enemies nor permanent friends. There are only permanent interests. That is what we must remember. You have to be very hard-nosed ruler. You should always look at what is good for you. Rest of the world will come later. Of course, this is exactly what is the opposite that you will be studying in your ethics paper, Ethics in International Relations and Funding, wherein you say that we should always give importance to global peace, prosperity and security. And in the process, if we have to compromise with our self-interest, we should do it. That is what is idealistic. But unfortunately, we are living in a very pragmatic world wherein idealism is always considered a weakness. So at least from a policy perspective, Kautilya is much more closer to what is reality than idealistic philosophers. So coming back here, as we have said, it is the self-interest that must determine the foreign policy initiatives of any country. So what do we mean by this? What is this self-interest that we are talking? What are the things that we are talking as part of self-interest? We are talking about the economic interests of the country. First, we are talking about the security. You must be able to protect your country at any cost. You will be talking about strategic long-term interests. And then you will be talking about how to benefit out of this globe, the rest of the world. Because you cannot make friends with everyone else. And then of course, one of the important factors is neighborhood policy. As once upon a time our foreign minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee and also the Prime Minister of the country, he said that we can change our friends and enemies, but we cannot change our neighbors. We have to live with our neighbors. So this neighborhood policy also becomes a very, very important factor. So here, you can talk about the defense cooperation. Everything that you look at here is what we have to see is whether we are able to benefit. There are many situations wherein you cannot benefit. Under those circumstances, you have to minimize your cost. You have to minimize your cost. You have to identify your friends and enemies depending on the situation and make sure that at the end of the day, you will benefit out of your transactions with the rest of the world. That is what we say about foreign policy. And another important thing here is that when it comes to this foreign policy, especially in a democracy like India, we can never forget our domestic factors. In fact, one of the criticisms against India's foreign policy is that it has always been a prisoner of domestic interests, especially with India being a secular country, multi-religious country. We do not want to hurt the sentiments of different sections of society. That is the reason why sometimes our foreign policy makers have committed so many blunders in the name of pampering the domestic interests. Why this becomes important is because you take the case of a country like China, communist China, dictatorship. It need not worry about domestic implications of its foreign policy. The government is not elected by the people, so they can do whatever they want without worrying about what the people are thinking, without worrying about whether they can come back to power on the basis of their foreign policy or not. This is what we will have to take into consideration in India, especially countries like India, or for that matter countries like America also, which are democratic countries. Apart from this, normally we always look at what are the immediate short term, what we are going to do, what will be the medium term, and what will be the long term strategic interests. All these things we must take into consideration. As far as foreign policies are concerned, Another thing that we have to remember here is that these foreign policies are not made in isolation. You can have an effective foreign policy only when you are very strong economically, militarily, and otherwise. That is where someone like Abdul Kalam comes into picture. He would say that if India is negotiating any nuclear non-proliferation treaties, let us negotiate from the position of a strength, not from a position of weakness. For example, in 1960s, Jawaharlal Nehru and later his daughter Indira Gandhi aggressively pursued this NPT, saying that we should get rid of nuclear weapons. Almost everyone in the world, especially all these world leaders, they took it as a joke. Why? Because India was in a position of a beggar. We never had any nuclear weapons. Neither militarily nor in economic terms, India was a strong, powerful country. So nobody listened to it. Everyone took it as a joke and they laughed at it. Whereas after India conducted nuclear tests and India had become top 5 countries in the world in terms of GDP, countries around the world started taking India seriously. They are listening to us with much more attention. That is what even Abdul Kalam also had pointed out. Let us become strong. That is the reason why, as I said, that this foreign policy can be successful only when you are domestically very strong. So this is what we say about foreign policies, the factors that would be influencing foreign policies. Now coming back here, let us see what has been India's foreign policy, say, since independence. We will not go too in-depth into those things, which is not required for us also. I am giving these details for you basically to understand what is happening at the present. If you want to know what is happening at the present, you must also go back to the pages of history, so that you will be able to empathize with what is happening at the present. So coming back here, if you look at India, India was ruled by the Britishers, and it was the Britishers who practically influenced India's foreign policy for those years. India being a colony of the Britishers, we never had any independent foreign policy. It was the Britishers who decided the boundaries of the country. When the Britishers entered into the country, if you would go back, India's boundaries extend up to Afghanistan in the northwest and up to Myanmar in the east, in the south almost till Sri Lanka. Now later Britishers had unified the country, political unification of the country had taken place. Slowly and but surely they had given freedom to those countries which they believed would be difficult for them to rule. Initially Afghanistan and later Myanmar, then in between Sri Lanka, so and then Nepal. All of them have been given freedom, and small regions like Tibet were part of India only, and then later they also got independence. So slowly Britishers divided the country, and the last initiative of Britishers was, in fact, the most destructive was partition of the country, India and Pakistan. And if you look at the India's boundaries with its neighbors, whether it is McMahon Line, Durand Line, Red Cliff Line, all these names are foreign names. These foreigners were the ones who determined the fate of the country. And how this unscientific division was done, we can easily know. For example, when the decision was taken to partition India on communal lines, Britishers had identified a lawyer from London, Radcliffe, and he was given the responsibility of drawing the boundaries within 2 months. Not even 2 months. He was asked to draw the boundaries. And they said that his biggest strength was he did not know anything about India. And they never considered the fact that it is going to be the most important weakness. So when he had drawn the boundaries of India and Pakistan, it was done in a highly arbitrary manner. One simple example I'll give you here. Take the case of Guru Nanak's birthplace. It is considered one of the holiest places of the Sikh community. Sikhs have always been part of India. Normally, what ideally should have been done is that that birthplace should have been included in India. It's only a few kilometers from our international border. So that the kind of problems that we are facing at this point of time would not have come up. This is what we say, knowing about the ground level realities. But this was not done. This was not done, and it was done in a highly arbitrary manner. And similarly, take case of Indochina, McMahon Line. Again, this McMahon Line was drawn during the British times in 1930s. And when this line was drawn, it was not scientifically accurate. And another important factor that we should take into consideration is that at that point of time, China was also not independent. So obviously, when China had become independent later, China refused to recognize the line. And the boundary dispute had become an inevitable part of any kind of negotiations between India and China. Added to that, immediately after independence, Pakistan declared war on India. Especially, Pakistan had sent its forces into Jammu and Kashmir. Indian government was extremely slow to react, because of which we lost a significant portion of Kashmir to Pakistan, which is known as POK, Pak Occupied Kashmir. And what Pakistan had done, it had generously given a part of that land to China, complicating the issue further. And similarly, we had problems with Bangladesh. Recently, we had tried to solve the problems with Bangladesh, and we have been successful also to some extent. In the same manner, Nepal also. Nepal has always been part of India, as even the foreign ministry pointed out recently also. The relationship between India and Nepal is almost, you can say, that as old as the entire civilization itself. So, but again, there are no clear-cut boundaries. Again, the basic issue here is that you can draw the boundaries in plain areas. You can build fences. But how can you draw the boundaries in those areas which are hilly? Forests, deep forests, rivers. So it becomes difficult. On top of it, there was a lot of ambiguity. Both the countries would always claim a certain portion of land as theirs because of no clarity regarding the boundaries. Again, Nepal would always say that it was not a sovereign nation of Nepal that had agreed to the boundaries. It was the Britishers who had drawn the boundaries arbitrarily. So this is where the entire dispute comes. Added to that, of course, 1962 Indo-China War, wherein, as historians point out, it was India's misadventure by entering into the Chinese territory that led to the war, or even China's aggression also. Either way, India had lost completely. Krishna Menon, who was the defense minister at that point of time, had asked Indian Army to move a little bit deep into the territory, no man's land, 2 kilometers one day, 3 kilometers next day. And Chinese waited, and then finally they declared full-scale war on India, in which India had seen a humiliating defeat. India had to cede around 90,000 square kilometers of land in Arunachal Pradesh, because of which even now China claims Arunachal Pradesh to be its own territory, not even disputed, its own territory. So this is where India's foreign policy has been. If you look at India's foreign policy, what could be the major weaknesses of our foreign policy? Who are those prime ministers who have been successful? When we evaluate Jawaharlal Nehru as the Prime Minister of India, his performance from 1947 to 1964, 17 long years, We say that two important successes of Nehru were his belief in democracy and also his faith in secularism. Whereas one of his biggest failures was his foreign policy. Nehru's foreign policy was a unmitigated disaster, to put it mildly, because Nehru was more of an idealist. Nehru was more of an idealist. And he was a statesman, but not a what you call a leader. He believed that he should be raising above these petty things like country, nationalism, patriotism, should think about global peace and security. He committed so many foreign policy blunders unintentionally, whether taking the Kashmir issue to United Nations, or whether having a blind faith in China. So if you look at our foreign policy makers or successive prime ministers of India since independence, whether we like it or not, it is the ideology that really dominated our foreign policies, which also has been the Waterloo. Why? Because since India was ruled by the Britishers for almost 200 years, we had this pathological hatred towards anything Western. Anything Western. So when America had offered India a seat in Security Council, permanent member, they were looking for a country from Asia to be part of United Nations Security Council, permanent member, what you call them as a P5. The offer was made to India, and immediately Nehru rejected it, saying that it was a Western conspiracy to create friction between India and China. How naive our policymakers at that point of time. It was a Western conspiracy. Why? Because they ruled our country for 200 years, so that we developed this kind of inherent disbelief in whatever the West had to offer to India. We always try to find loopholes. We always try to find unintended intentions in whatever the West does. And that really made our foreign policy makers to become closer to China, thinking that it is only Asia that can counter the West. It is only this Asian countries so that could be countering the Western influence. And that is the reason why during the bipolar world between 1950s and 1990s, India moved much more closer to Russia. Even though we remained neutral, we were part of NAM, but in reality we were much more closer to Soviet Russia. Why? Because of our pathological hatred towards anything that is West. That influenced our foreign policy. That was the reason why Nehru rejected America's offer. And on the other hand, he said that that should be given to China. China should be made Security Council member, permanent member of Security Council. Of course, China had its own way of Thanksgiving. You know what China has done later. Even as late as yesterday also, China tried to bring up this issue, terrorism, trying to blame India by siding with Pakistan. Pakistan's this Karachi's stock exchange was attacked, and China was trying to blame India, saying that the Balochistan terrorists were sponsored by India. So China never loses an opportunity to criticize India, to blame India in the Security Council. And the seeds were sown during Nehru's time. These were all policy blunders which we have committed. Why? Because, as I said, most of our leaders at that point of time were blinded by their ideologies. Nehru's biggest failure was his foreign policy. Next thing is that another mistake that was committed during that time was this blind faith in China. Nehru had come out with a slogan also, Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai. And of course, Chinese could not understand Hindi properly. They thought that bye bye means bye bye. They went back and declared war on India, 1962. So, overall, if you look at it, we never had any what is called strategic interest dominating our foreign policy. We believed in these useless concepts like multilateralism. We believed in these idealistic concepts like global peace and security. And we never strengthened ourselves domestically, either in terms of economy or military or anything else, especially during the time of Jawaharlal Nehru. So that was where it was a big failure as far as India was concerned. Of course, as I said, it ultimately led to Indo-China War in 1962 because of again another cabinet colleague of Jawaharlal Nehru, Krishna Menon. He made this assumption that China would not attack India even if India goes into Chinese territory and occupy the territory. He made this assumption because India and China are communist countries, at least socialist countries, and he made this assumption that one socialist country would not attack another socialist country. Again, completely naive foreign policy. And of course, another blunder that was committed was after India got independence in 1947, either deliberately or otherwise, the government completely neglected strengthening our military. We focused more on economy. Of course, the conditions were such that we had no option but to focus more on our economic growth and development. At the same time, we should not have forgotten our strategic interests. So in 1962, all those weaknesses could be seen, wherein the soldiers did not have weapons, they did not have any arms and ammunition, and India was literally comprehensively defeated. After that, Nehru had lost whatever the credibility he had as a global leader, especially of third world countries. You will lose your credibility when you cannot even protect your own country. You can make any number of statements. Nehru made the statement that not even a blade of grass grows there when China occupied 90,000 square kilometers of our land in Arunachal Pradesh. It does not really matter whether a blade of grass grows there or not. If it is your land, you have to protect it. Now take the case of Delhi now. The population of Delhi is so high, the registered population is so high that there is no place for even a blade of grass to grow also. Going by Nehru's logic, China should come and occupy Delhi also. So this is where we can commit strategic mistakes. And after that, Indira Gandhi had been a little bit more aggressive with her foreign policy, and she took the decision to fight war with Pakistan over creation of Bangladesh. She went ahead in spite of American threats and made Bangladesh an independent country by dividing Pakistan. Again, after that, she committed some mistakes. What were the mistakes that she has committed? 1972 Simla Pact, wherein the then Prime Minister of Pakistan came to India because India has captured more than 95,000 Pakistani soldiers, and Pakistan had to get them released at any cost, and Pakistan was completely comprehensively defeated in the war. That was the time India should have put an end to any kind of a border dispute between India and Pakistan, which Indira Gandhi had failed to do. because of which again we are paying the price. We could have either converted this LOC into an international border, or we could have taken some territory of Pakistan. Nobody would have objected to it. Pakistan was not in a position to object also. As I said that even a small thing like Guru Nanak's birthplace also could have become part of India. But Indira Gandhi had shown sympathy. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto pleaded with Indira Gandhi that he should not be forced to sign any humiliating treaty. If he is forced to sign any humiliating treaty, then there would not be any guarantee to his life if once he goes back to Pakistan. He pleaded with Indira Gandhi to show some kind of leniency. Unfortunately, she had shown it. And India did not sign a border pact with Pakistan when the golden opportunity was provided to us. This is where another strategic mistake that we have committed at that point of time. On hindsight, this is what we can say, but history are always evaluated on hindsight only. Coming back, after that, if you look at the Prime Ministership of Rajiv Gandhi, Rajiv Gandhi was also a little bit more aggressive in terms of his foreign policy. He wanted to have better relations. He committed some blunders in the process. Had sent army into Sri Lanka to flush out LTTE, which ultimately led to his own assassination. Similarly, he had also invested heavily in China. This was the time when India and China were trying to come closer together. And ultimately, he was a little bit successful, but not completely. And then when we talk about our prime minister since independence, there were two prime ministers whose foreign policies were extremely successful. And we will be surprised to know that both those prime ministers were not at all charismatic leaders. They did not enjoy any huge popularity among the masses. They were not what you call people's leaders, and both of them were accidental prime ministers. One was P.V. Narasimha Rao and the other one Manmohan Singh. And foreign policy during their period, India had seen maximum amount of successes during this period, whether it is Manmohan Singh or P.V. Narasimha Rao. If you look at P.V. Narasimha Rao, when he was the Prime Minister, he made sure that India would get rid of this ideology in terms of foreign policy. Still, there were so many compulsions because India imported huge amount of petroleum products from the Gulf countries. So India had to play some kind of a 2% zero-sum game with Gulf countries and Israel. India could not have openly had any diplomatic relations with Israel. Of course, as we have mentioned in the beginning itself, most of the prime ministers, they catered to their domestic interests. Israel has been an invaluable ally to India because of shared strategic interests. In 1962 war also, Israel had come forward. So was the case with 1965 as well as 1971 wars. Israel was forthcoming in terms of it providing any kind of assistance to India. Israel was the only country that had come in a voluntary manner to support India. India took the support, India never acknowledged the support openly, again for the fear of backlash at the home and also for the fear of making these Gulf countries angry. But P.V. Narasimha Rao, as the foreign minister, as the prime minister, broke this myth of invincibility of these Gulf countries and openly said that India would have diplomatic relations with Israel. That was one of the major initiatives that we had taken. Second initiative that we had taken was, this was the time when India was liberalizing its country. This was the time when India had opted for globalization also. This was also the time when Soviet Russia had disintegrated. He could see the fact that Soviet Russia was no longer a superpower. So there was a decisive shift in India's foreign policy, with America taking the place that was earlier occupied by Soviet Russia. So India was moving closer towards America. India had, for all good, abandoned its non-alignment policy. Even now also we talk about NAM. Even now also UPSC will ask relevance of NAM in your essays, but otherwise it has no relevance at all. For good, India has abandoned its non-alignment policy and moved towards West, especially America. And another major foreign policy initiative of P. V. Narasimha Rao was this Look East policy also. The present Act East policy of Modi government had its roots in a Look East policy of P. V. Narasimha Rao. He could visualize the fact that India would benefit immensely as part of its globalization by integrating itself with the rest of the world, whether it is East or West. And he was more in favor of having this kind of bilateral treaties with the rest of the world, the Look East policy. Next major initiative of P. V. Narasimha Rao during this period was in 1993, India and China signed this border pact. And what they have opted for is stalemate. They said that let the present situation prevail, let there be peace prevail at the border, let Indian forces and Chinese forces do not indulge in any kind of armed combat. Let us accept the peace at the border and focus more on economic relationship. This is what P. Narasimha Rao had done. Then later Vajpayee, BJP's ideology was more rightist, so they moved much more closer to America, at the same time still maintaining a symbolic relationship with Russia. And of course, Vajpayee invested heavily in Pakistan also. He went to Agra, and that is where it was also a failure. So if you look at all the prime ministers, all these charismatic leaders, prime minister, right from Jawaharlal Nehru to Indira Gandhi, to Rajiv Gandhi, to Vajpayee, to Narendra Modi, what is common to all these leaders? And what was the mistake committed by all these leaders? They believed that their personal charisma would help them to win friends at the global level also. They could not understand the fact that at the global level, international relations are guided by strategic interests, but not by personal relationships. And if you, as a leader, you start investing your personal charisma in these global relationships, it could result in disastrous consequences. Like in case of Nehru and China, like in case of Rajiv Gandhi and Sri Lanka, or for that matter Vajpayee and Pakistan, or at present our Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the Chinese Premier. They had more than 18 meetings. Of course, what is the end result? The present situation. So they had committed this cardinal mistake of using their personal charisma to influence international relationships. At the global level, in mature democracies and dictatorship like China, they are not easily influenced by these things. They would make sure that these personal relationships are turned into their favor, which has been the basic issue with the Indian foreign policy, even now also. And another mistake that they have committed is, as part of their developing those personal informal relationships, they gave a lot more importance to what is called summit meetings. You keep on meeting those leaders regularly in the glare of media, in the glare of international and global and domestic media. You know, you can be walking on the beaches of Mahabalipuram. You can be swinging in Gujarat. But the problem with these kind of international summits, these summit meetings, is that summit meetings is that strategic issues would be lost. More importance would be given to peripheral aspects. What kind of a dress they were wearing, what were the food they had during those meetings, and how did they speak. These kind of things would be given more importance and putting back burner to all the strategic aspects. What was the reason why Manmohan Singh, or for that matter a PM Sarao, had succeeded? Because they always carried out their international relations behind closed doors. Manmohan Singh, even as he toured many of the countries, but he never publicized all his meetings. For example, the Indo-US nuclear deal was a very good deal for India. Or for that matter, Manmohan Singh continued with the Lukish policy with in our countries, especially Japan and other countries. Or for that matter, other foreign policy initiatives of Manmohan Singh. Why he had become successful, or for that matter, why P. Narasimha had become successful? Because they did not unnecessarily invest their personality in foreign relationships. It is a double-edged sword, and that is the price that we are paying now. Because our Prime Minister carried out the foreign policy, especially with China, as now or never. He believed that China is going to be India's greatest ally in its fight against the so-called Western powers. You cannot put all your eggs in one basket. And when this the relationship turns, you don't know where to go also, where to hide also. So never carry these foreign policies in the glare of media. Everything should be done through continuous meetings behind the closed doors by those nameless and faceless bureaucrats. That is where issues should be discussed, should be resolved. So coming back here, so this is what and in the last 6 years, if you look at our Prime Minister Narendra Modi's foreign policy, again he was very aggressive. As we have mentioned, he wanted to use his personal charisma to influence global relations. So he went to America, he met all the global leaders. Some of those summits were highly successful, whereas in some cases he had to face so many other challenges. Take the case of the recent Indo-US relationship also. When the USA president had come to India, still we could not find solutions to most of the strategic issues. That is where India's foreign policy is lacking in its focus. We could not find solutions to most of the strategic issues. Why? Because as we have said, the government should be spending more time on discussing the intricacies of foreign policy behind the closed doors, rather than spending a lot of time on the summits and meetings. So coming back here, so this is what this is how foreign policy has been carried out in India since independence, right from Jawaharlal Nehru till Narendra Modi. And the advantage that the present Prime Minister has, which other Prime Ministers did not have, they never had, was India has become a powerful country. Definitely, if not the most powerful, it has become definitely a country with a decisive say in global geopolitics, thanks to its economic might. And the question is how we are going to use our economic might to influence our foreign policy, to make sure that our foreign policy becomes extremely successful. So coming back here, let us see this Indochina. As we have said, the problems here are historical. When the Communist Party had come to power, Mao, he said that he would not recognize the international border drawn by the Britishers, McMahon Line. And he said that he would draw his own boundaries. And from 1950s onwards, China always made its intention clear to the rest of the world. And more importantly, being a dictatorship, being under a dictatorship, it was very easy to carry out its foreign policy without worrying about domestic interests. And it was very aggressive. And for a long period of time, China was also a poor country like India till 1990s. So till 1990s, it was aggressive, but it was covertly doing the things, but not openly. After 1990s, when China started becoming a economically powerful country, it made its intentions much more clear, much more obvious. Even a blind man can see what China wants to do. And especially after 2000s, what we had witnessed is the end of what we call a unipolar world. Between 1950s and 1990s, we had multipolar world. The whole of 1990s was dominated by United States of America. And after September 11, 2001, obviously we moved towards what is called multilateralism. We also had witnessed the end of a unipolar world. America's dominance, you can say that America's monopoly has ended. You cannot say dominance. America is still very dominant and powerful country, but its monopoly has ended with the coming up of other countries also in Asia and other places, where it is Russia, which was trying to become again powerful, or whether it is Brazil, India, China, Japan, again Germany. So all these countries are willing to adopt their own path in international relations, sometimes rejecting America's policies. So this multilateralism has really helped China. Of all the countries that we have mentioned here, it was China which took the major lead in questioning America's dominance. And the fact that domestically China was becoming extremely powerful also helped China. Please remember, economy is the most important part of foreign policy. Why? Because if you are economically stronger, you can invest a lot in your security, defense, army, ammunition, and you can also be aggressive in terms of your intentions. Everything depends on your economic strength. Thankfully for China, its economy was progressing from 1990s till now. It is said that China's economy had progressed almost double-digit growth rates. That is what China claims, but definitely for a very significant period of time, it had witnessed double-digit growth rates because of what you call it as a state-led capitalism. Of course, from then onwards, automatically we have seen radical changes in China's foreign policy. Even before that also, China's intentions were very much clear, but they were a little bit cautious. Now they need not be cautious or careful. They can do openly whatever they want, knowing fully well that it becomes difficult for the rest of the world to counter them. For example, its GDP almost $16 trillion. Its foreign exchange reserves, $4 trillion, which is more than the foreign exchange reserves of IMF and World Bank combined together. So China was more than happy to invest its economic strength to improve its influence in the rest of the world, right from Asia to Africa. It is investing in the rest of the world in infrastructure for its own benefit, immediately in terms of economy, and strategically in terms of long-term consequences. That is what China is doing. Thanks to its economic strength, I will give you some of the facts later. It has also improved very much in terms of its military strength. For example, if you take the case in 2019, China had spent around $260 billion on defense, whereas India had spent around $70 billion. Strategically, China also had changed the component of its expenditure. India's major expenditure goes towards the pensions and the salaries of its armored personnel, with little amount of money left for what we call capital expenditure. Whereas China recognized the fact that under the present day world, you don't require too much of manpower. Whereas the wars can be fought easily with AI, artificial intelligence, and other modern warfare. So strategically, they had shifted their expenditure, which India had failed to do also. So coming up here, you can see the kind of a difference that we have. So, and if you look at India's GDP, less than $3 trillion. Less than $3 trillion. China, they simply don't mind giving a loan of $10 billion to Sri Lanka to build a port there. When the Sri Lankan government fails to repay the money, China would say that the port should be given to them on lease for 40-50 years. That means they are taking away a critical infrastructure in a foreign country. That is how they are doing the things. They would first liberally provide the loans for infrastructure in different countries. When the countries fail to repay the loans, they will say that just give us that infrastructure to us, the asset to us for 30-40 years. They are doing these things in a very strategic manner, whereas India, still we can say emphatically that being a very poor country, India cannot hope to do these kind of things. I said that with the $4 trillion, their foreign exchange reserves are more than combined foreign exchange reserves of IMF and World Bank together. They can use their foreign exchange reserves to whatever the purpose that they want. So, with these things in mind, what China has done is that China wanted to change the borders. If you look at it in the last 30 years or so, what China has done strategically is, this is what the template they had followed. Northwestern provinces of China, bordering Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Turkmenistan. Whether it is Pakistan is in no position to counter China. So whatever China asks, they will give you. Where is Nepal, Bhutan, India, Tibet? China always claims that it is an integral part of China only. Or Myanmar, or come to the eastern part, either it is the case of Indonesia, or Malaysia, Japan, Philippines. With all these countries, what China does is that first it gets into some kind of a dispute. It provokes the other country. Its forces will go into the other country. Then it will say that let us negotiate. In that negotiations, it will make sure that it gets maximum out of the deal. Because since the rest of the countries, small countries, are not in a position to fight China militarily for a long period of time, they had no option to accept any of those humiliating treaties. And China would make sure that the countries would feel that it would be beneficial for them only. When China had signed these kind of treaties with, as I mentioned, with Kyrgyzstan or Turkmenistan or other, when Soviet Russia had disintegrated in 1989, that is where we talk about the strategic interests. China could foresee the fact that most of the provinces which are bordering, most of the countries which were bordering China, they had a good amount of Muslim population, and it could see the fact, it could oversee the fact that they might be creating trouble for China. So what China has done is that it had become proactive. It had entered into, as I said, it had sent its army into those provinces, and it had forced those countries to cede land to China. in return for some monetary compensation or for some other trade benefits. So that the countries also would not feel bad that they had to compromise with their sovereignty. That is what China had done with all the countries. And as I said, it never made its, it was never afraid of making its intentions clear with its aggressive policies, right from Mongolia to the north, then Soviet Russia. Even Soviet Russia had to succumb to the demands of China. Soviet Russia, once upon a time superpower, is not in a position to even say no to China, thanks to its economic and military might. As I said, when it comes to Pakistan, Pakistan had given this Aksai Chin region to China, which is very strategically very important for China. Now coming back here, when the China started this Belt and Road Initiative, it had identified the fact that this Aksai Chin region and the present the area of conflict, this Galvan Valley and the surrounding areas are very crucial, because right from the British times onwards, this Galvan Valley and the surrounding regions were major trading routes. Normally, this is through this major trading routes only you will go enter into Afghanistan. From there, you will go to what we call European continent. So China wanted to revive these old Silk routes, and it wanted to strengthen its economic might. So they had identified the fact that they needed a complete comprehensive control of these regions. Pakistan did not object to building the roads and everything. So there was no problem with Pakistan. The only problem was India, because when this Belt and Road Initiative was announced, India had objected to it, saying that it was going through Aksai Chin region, which India considered to be an integral part of our country. Right from the days of Jawaharlal Nehru, we kept on making these announcements that this was an integral part of India, even though practically for all purposes it is under Chinese control. So what China is doing here is they realize the fact that if not today, tomorrow it can be problematic. So if you want to resolve this problem, how can you do it? You cannot force India to accept publicly that this Aksai Chin region will be an integral part of China. India will never do it. So what you have to do is that create a much bigger problem for India so that they can forget about Aksai Chin. At some point of time, China had said that let us accept status quo. That is, the 90,000 square kilometers of land that China had occupied in Arunachal Pradesh would be part of China, and this rest of things on the western front here, this will be part of India. That was not accepted by India, because India did not want India wanted a separate solution to both these problems. India did not want to club this Aksai Chin region with what is there in Arunachal Pradesh. Rightly so also. So then that is when China had realized the fact that for its this Belt and Road Initiative or for future infrastructure, it must divert the attention of India. So what China has done is that this goes back to more than 20 years. When India was fighting Pakistan in the Kargil war, China used that period to build permanent structures in this eastern part of Kashmir. It had built permanent structures. It was building infrastructure, roads, permanent structures, and then providing other infrastructural facilities. And it was also militarily strengthening that region. That is what it has done. India did not recognize these things. By the time India recognized it, it was too late. Still, India believed that this Galvan Valley would be undisputed region and China would not enter into those places. But China did not stop there. They knew that unless they have some kind of buffer zone, they would not be able to do whatever they wanted in this Aksai Chin region. That is the reason why it had pushed its army more into Indian territory. And as one of the BJP ministers has said, during the tenure of Manmohan Singh, for those 10 years, we had seen hundreds of Chinese incursions. They would come and go back. They would play this cat and mouse game with Indian forces. India had no option but to militarily strengthen the region. During the time of Manmohan Singh, this was not done. And slowly but surely, after that, India also recognized the gravity of the situation, and India also strengthening its infrastructure in this part of the world. Obviously, it antagonized Chinese interests. China felt that how can India focus on infrastructure, especially in those areas which are considered to be strategic for Chinese economic interests. China would not tolerate. So, India, it had to do something. So suddenly, all of a sudden, recently 2-3 months back, Chinese forces had come to, had entered into Indian territory. The government of India denies that not even an inch of India's land is into Chinese territory, but the problem here is that we don't know what are the borders here. So we say that when the entire Galwan Valley is a part of India, that means any Chinese forces there means China has entered into Indian territory, which goes against the public statements of what the government of India says. Obviously, government publicly cannot accept that enemies have entered into our territory. The government will be trying to solve the situation or to ensure that they would go back. Earlier, they used to come and they used to leave. Now, they had decided to stay there permanently, as it can be seen in terms of the activity that was going on there. Hundreds of trucks and building tents. Anybody can see that. And then, of course, unfortunately, what happened some time back, when Chinese and Indian forces had come together and it resulted in the loss of 20 Indian soldiers. It is said that the maximum number of soldiers died after 1962 war on this front. So obviously, India was, as usual, caught unaware about these happenings. Why? What are the mistakes that India has committed here? And what could be the solution? That is what let us look at here. What are the mistakes that we have committed here? The most important mistake that we have committed here is we had put a lot of faith in China. It was a strategic blunder on the part of India. Which has been the feature of India's foreign policy for a long period of time. The basic problem with our foreign policy, as I have been pointing out since the last 1 hour, has been romanticization of our foreign policy, moving away completely from realities. As we have said, it is believed that India and China should come together and counter this Western influence. We should come together. That is the reason why we went back to the pages of history. 18th century was called Asian century. Why? Because this was a time when India's GDP and China's GDP was very high. India's share in global GDP was more than 30%. So was China's GDP at that point of time. So India and China combined together had controlled 60% of global GDP. That's why we call it as Asian century. So what we believe, our policymakers believed, is that we can revive this past glory and make 21st century also an Asian century. Because both the countries are the most populous countries in the world, and both of them are rapidly growing. In terms of purchasing power parity, both the countries are in top positions. Even in terms of nominal GDP also, both the countries are counting very high. So it was believed that India and China would come together, should come together and end the domination of the West, because 19th and 20th centuries were dominated by the West, whether it is Europe or America. So we believed that it is time for India and China come together. And this ideology influenced our foreign policy. This ideology was the most important factor that was driving our foreign policy. And that is where we committed the mistake. This is good, definitely, but the problem is that you should always be skeptical about any country that you deal with. That is what we say, healthy skepticism should be the driving force behind any foreign policy, because no country in the world will sacrifice its self-interest for a romantic ideology. China says that yes, 21st century can be Asian century, but in that Asian continent only China should be there. There should not be any place for India. China says that why do you want to call it as the Asian century? 19th century, European century, dominated by imperial powers. 20th century, America. So 21st, why can't it be only China? Why do you want India? India says that let us come together, and China says that who are you? That is where the problem is, the mistake that was committed by our policy makers. So China always showed its intentions, and what China has done is that China had tried to exploit the situation. Within a very short period of time, it had become one of India's major exporters and importers by making use of liberal trade policies of India. Who benefited out of this relationship? Very difficult to say, India or China. But certain things are very much clear here. 70% of the cell phones, mobiles used by Indians are Chinese made. You know who has benefited the most. When India is exporting to China, it is mostly raw material. It is mostly some intermediate products. Whereas China, it dominates the Indian market, whether it is finished products, whether it is intermediate goods, whether it is raw material, or whether it is any other natural resources. Obviously, it is China which has benefited immensely out of this relationship. India has a huge amount of trade deficit with China. It is China. It has benefited. That is the reason why Chinese Premier has absolutely no problem in meeting our Prime Minister any number of times, because it is benefiting China. At the same time, China had lost sight of its strategic interests. It also realized the fact that India is also becoming a strong and powerful country. If not today, tomorrow, India will definitely become a powerful country. After 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. Look at what was our GDP 30 years back. What is our GDP now? So after 30 years, if India can ensure that we can grow by at 10% per annum, we can easily surpass China within 15 years itself. China recognized the fact that India could become not a partner but a rival. That is when China started making its moves. So when China comes out with these kind of border conflicts, the objective is much more significant. It wanted to tell the rest of the world that whatever we do, rest of the world will have to follow it. What do we mean by this? All around the world, the perception is that India is a soft state. That means whether in terms of its domestic policies or its foreign policies, India is not a country that is known to take tough decisions. Whereas China, everyone knows, is a tough taskmaster. Still it has It has no emotions or sentiments. Very hard-nosed politics. China looks at everything only from its benefit point of view. It never looks at the cost to the other side. Whereas the perception is that India is always a country that is known as a soft state. For example, when we know that it was Pakistani terrorists who attacked India in 2008, Kasab and others, what did we do? Nothing. We had stationed our army near the borders for some time and then nothing. So countries around the world, they know the fact. Similarly, China keeps on claiming that Aksai Chin region is an integral part of China, but we never did anything. We only issued statements saying that it is an integral part of India. We objected to this Belt and Road Initiative. Beyond that, we did not do anything. India, unfortunately, is considered a soft state. That is where China wanted to make best use of the things. That is the reason why, whatever the border skirmishes that we are witnessing right now are a strategic plan of China. First thing is, they wanted to show to the rest of the world that India will only react to a situation. India's foreign policy has always been either reactive or inactive in nature. India cannot go far. It always imposes restrictions on itself, self-imposed restrictions. And India, militarily, it might have advanced military, but it will be afraid of using its military might. That is what China's thinking has been. And that is the reason why they had sent. They know fully well that it would not result in a full-fledged war. On the other hand, in the last 50 years or so, whenever this kind of border conflicts had come up, India has always been proactive in asking for peace, temporary peace. And we always said that let the status quo remain. That means they will come inside your territory for 2 kilometers, they stay there. Status quo means they will be staying there. Then after some point of time again they will come for 2 more kilometers, they will stay there, and then status quo. So that is where China has done these things, knowing fully well that India would not be reacting aggressively to its designs. This is what China's foreign policy has always been. India, on the other hand, as I have said, is more cautious, because being a democratic country, the leaders will have to take into consideration the welfare of the people while taking drastic decisions like going to war. And at any point of time, going to war is not an option for any democratic country, for the simple reason that you cannot put the lives of your own people at risk. That is the reason why most of the democratic countries prefer peace, whereas China has no compulsions like this. They can do whatever they want. For example, in this recent clashes, China never really bothered to announce the number of people, number of their soldiers who died. So coming back here, what are the other factors that led to this conflict? There are so many of them. First and foremost, as I have mentioned, India is becoming economically powerful. And China feels that if not today, tomorrow India is going to be a major threat. Second reason why China had taken up this adventure is they wanted to change again the boundaries. As I mentioned, Aksai Chin region, very important for China. They wanted to have this buffer so that they will have more amount of land on their side. In future, they might need more infrastructure. Third reason why this conflict. China is facing so much of criticism from the rest of the world for its handling of coronavirus. Almost every country in the world had turned against China. So they wanted to deflect the attention of the world, divert the attention of the world. So they thought that if you cannot solve one problem, make sure that people will forget that problem by creating another problem. For example, if you look at India also, in the last 15 days also, last 15, 20 days also, the news about corona had gone into the back pages of newspapers. What we are discussing is only Indo-China. That is what China also wanted from the rest of the world. Let the rest of the world discuss about these conflicts so that China can successfully divert the attention of the people, which it has done also successfully. Next reason why China has done this. This is what some of these policy analysts have said, but we don't know how much truth is there in this particular reason. India has changed the geography of Jammu and Kashmir, political geography of Jammu and Kashmir. Jammu and Kashmir had been made a union territory, with Ladakh being an independent UT, Jammu and Kashmir. While announcing their decision, India has said that the international borders will remain the same. That means it will not have any kind of impact on Aksai Chin region. But China felt uncomfortable. That is what China wants us to believe. It is status quo at the global level only, at the international borders. But China wants us to believe that this decision of Indian government has provoked China to take this action. And I don't think there is much of truth in this argument of China. So this is what. And what could be the real reason? As I have mentioned, China is looking at long-term strategic interests. First and foremost, China wanted to show India its position at the global level. This is very important for China, because China wanted to preempt any kind of aggressive posturing on the part of India. You don't want to be in a position where you are reacting to a particular situation, like India, what India is now. So it is always better to be proactive, like what China has done. That is what it has done. Another important reason why China has done these things is, as I said again, the strategic interest. You want to ensure safety and security for your infrastructure projects. So, but at the end of the day, like it happened so many times in the past, India was caught completely unaware about these aspects. Is it a military intelligence failure? It is for the army to speak about it, but army, they would not accept these things openly. Similarly, are Chinese still sitting on Indian territory? The government again will not openly accept it. If they are not sitting on Indian territory, then what is there to discuss with the Chinese generals? Every day, so much of time is spent on meeting those army generals of China. If they are not sitting on Indian territory, what is there to discuss with them? So that is the thing. Now, looking at all these things, considering all these aspects, what India should do in the future? That is very, very important for us. What India must be doing in the future. Because you can expect China to continue with this kind of aggressive posturing in the future also. There is definitely no doubt that China would continue with this kind of tactics. What India can do, what India should do. At present, one of the initiatives of the Government of India is to ban these Chinese apps, uh, Chinese apps, mobile applications. And government also has taken a decision to ban these Chinese forms from applying to our tenders, infrastructure projects. And the government has also asked e-commerce companies to name the products from China. This is what the Government of India has done, which is necessary but not sufficient. So what we must remember is that whatever the measures that we take here, two things: they should not compromise with our strategic interests. Second, they must send a strong signal to China about our intentions. Not only to China, but to the rest of the world also. We must send a strong signal. In foreign policy, these signals are more powerful than the real actions. So what India can do? We have to take multiple measures simultaneously on several fronts. Starting with economic. As we keep on mentioning all the time, it is all about economy. What India can do is that India can hurt Chinese economic interests with a minimum loss to our business interests. It is always a 2% zero-sum game. That is what we must remember. If you are gaining something, means you are giving up something also. What we must do is identify those sectors in our economy which cannot survive without the Chinese imports in the immediate future. Which cannot survive without Chinese imports in the immediate future. Pharmaceutical industry and other core industries, basic infrastructure industries. And make sure that you are not affecting these sectors. You cannot have a macro policy for all these things. You must have a sector specific policy. This is where India needs to do a little bit of research. It must consult its own people, various vested interests, and come out with a detailed policy. Identify those sectors where you can hurt China most, but at the same time, the damage to your domestic interest is very minimal. For example, if you ban those apps, mobile applications, the loss to you will be minimal, almost nil. If you are banning TikTok, it is good only for your people. At least people will come out of that virtual world and see the real problems. It is good. The rest of the mobile apps we also have alternatives. But you are sending a strong signal there. Similarly, you can identify those foreign investments, you can identify those imports, which are unnecessary, but which can hurt the Chinese economy. For example, take the case of mobile phone market. It is still dominated by Chinese, 70%, 80%. Take a chance and try to limit their imports. Take a chance and try to limit their imports. Or nationalize if they have their companies, their industries in India. If they have their own production units in India, nationalize them. You can do that in the name of self-interest. You can do those things. Or purchase their shares in India, like what America is doing. So you have to think on these lines. to cut the economic relationship. You must hit them where it hurts the most. Both the countries are so dependent on each other. The bigger the country, the larger would be the impact. Obviously, China has to feel more bad for its misadventure. That is what Indian policymakers must be doing. It requires a little bit of time identifying the sectors and also taking all these kind of drastic steps. Of course, you can impose the tariffs also, because under WTO regulations, for security reasons, the countries can always impose tariffs from imports from other countries. India can do this one. As I said, you must focus on economy. In the beginning itself, we have mentioned that had India been a $10 trillion economy, China would never have dreamt of these kind of misadventures. So, India must look at these kind of ambitious targets. Our Prime Minister had come out with this $5 trillion economy, which looks like a distant dream at this point of time, thanks to so many factors. But the country will have to wake up, and it should become much more proactive in terms of increasing GDP. In the medium and the long term, it is only your economy that can save you from any kind of problems. Automatically, when your economy becomes much bigger, you can spend more on military also. So that is what we have to do. Then what else can India do? What else India should do? Next thing is India must change its policy related to armed forces. As we have mentioned, China in the last 10 years had retired 3 lakh soldiers, army men, and invested that money in technology, modern weapons. India should also look at these things very seriously. Do we require so much of army at all? Must reduce our expenditure on salaries and pensions and make sure that we are spending more money on arms, ammunition, technology. Very, very important. You require policy commitment on the part of our political leaders. These are all very tough decisions, but you have to take those decisions. Very important. You must strategically spend your defense expenditure. China spends 4 times more than India, and if you look at the real expenditure of India on arms and ammunition and everything else, it is negligible compared to what China is spending. So India must change its policy towards defense expenditure. Next thing is, India must strengthen its military intelligence. Almost every time we are caught off guarded. We are caught unaware about all these events. What is the reason why? We wake up only after everything is over. We must strengthen our military intelligence. We cannot compromise with it. And this is one of the weakest aspects of our security, especially defense policies. We must strengthen our military intelligence, whether it is our borders with China or Pakistan. This is one of our weaknesses. Next, as part of this, India must focus on improving infrastructure in its border areas, whether it is western or eastern border. You must focus on improving infrastructure, which India has been doing of late in the last decade or so. We should focus on improving our infrastructure. Next, what else we can do? Continuing with the defense, the government should come out with a strategic policy documents looking into the future, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, regarding our defense and security. We should cover all the aspects, whether it is economic, international relations, army, border issues, or you name it, everything. India must be clear in its vision towards the future, which maybe at present is not there. It cannot be ad hoc in terms of your responses. You must have a long-term vision document which can provide guidelines to the present day policymakers. After 30 years, what we are going to do, where we are going to be there in terms of all these aspects. It is high time that we come out with these this kind of strategic policy documents. Next, what India can do, what else India can do. As we study in international relations, an enemy's enemy is your friend. India should be aggressive and proactive. Till now, unfortunately, our foreign policy has always been reactive or mostly inactive. India should be aggressive and proactive in making allies which are or who are against Chinese interests. Obviously, when a country grows rapidly, naturally it would be making a lot of enemies. Those enemies should be converted into our friends. For example, USA can become India's strategic partner in the future. If in the process we have to give something to USA, let us give something to USA, because if you run your foreign policy only in the name of your own self-interest, it cannot survive for a longer period of time. If we have to give access to some of the multinational companies of USA to our products in our domestic markets, so be it. For that, get something more also. Unfortunately, these kind of negotiations are, it looks absent in terms of India's foreign policy negotiations. Maybe because India's foreign policy negotiations are dominated by these career bureaucrats, IFS officers. And the basic problem with all these bureaucrats is that they are afraid of taking any risky decisions. Second, they are mostly status quoist in nature. Maybe what India can think of is having a lateral entry, especially in External Affairs Ministry, and have those experts and who can come and take those risky decisions. It is very, very important for India. Whether it is USA, whether it is Japan, whether it is Australia, whether it is South Korea, because North Korea is an ally of China, whether it is Philippines, Russia. Russia is neutral now, but India can show some lollipops to Russia, saying that we will buy your military equipment, but you should be talking in favor of us in public, because as we keep on saying, the gestures will go a long way in influencing foreign policy decisions. So we must build a coalition of countries who are not happy, and of course European Union. In the process, if we have to give up something, we must not be afraid of doing those things. That is where we talk about strategic policy. We must build up this coalition, international coalition, and we have to show our intentions to China that as long as China wants to be a trustworthy friend, we will have faith in China. But if China tries to commit any kind of misadventures, it would be paying a very, very heavy price for it. And China's economic might can be a major obstacle also, because China is in such a situation right now that it cannot live without the rest of the world. It is exporting so many things to the rest of the world. Now, thanks to this present global recession and also the COVID crisis, the world is moving towards protectionism. It can impact China very adversely. If we become proactive and get all these countries together and let all these countries come together and impose tariffs on Chinese products, that is more than enough to destroy China economically. But it requires, as I said, a more proactive and dynamic policy thinking on the part of India. Next thing that India can do, what India must do or India should do is India must also think about this cyber security. India must strengthen its cyber security, because this cyber warfare is going to be the most important instrument of war in the coming future. India should be proactive and ensure cyber security. And as they say, where it is love or war, what really matters is whether you are successful or not. You can, as Kautilya says, adopt immoral means also. India can attack Chinese cyber installations, causing huge amount of damage to them. Everything is fair in love and war. India cannot be moral or ethical when the rest of the world, when your opponent is highly unethical and immoral. You must shed your peaceful pacifist ideology and become more aggressive. India must show its intentions. India must show, especially to China, that it is a tough taskmaster. It is no longer a soft state. Let the Chinese key installations be attacked by our cyber experts, and India must be prepared also. As I said, it is all about sending the signals. It is all about telling our intentions. So this is what another thing that India can do or should do in the immediate future. Then what else India should do? India must come out clearly. There should not be any ambiguity in terms of its border with China. Let there be no ambiguity. Take the case of Aksai Chin region. Take the case of Aksai Chin. India says that it is part of, it is an integral part of India, but it is under Chinese control. When India says that it is part of India, and that is the reason why India is opposing this Belt and Road Initiative, rest of the world is not willing to even to take notice of it also. The worst thing that can happen to you is when you are ignored by others. That is what is happening. So let us accept the fact. Whatever may be its position, India should be making it very much clear. Including every inch of land, India must define its borders and tell China that any other relationship should be preceded by solving the border issues. What India has done in the last 25 years or so is, we said that let us maintain a status quo near the border and focus on other economic and trade relationship. And China has used this to its advantage. Now reverse the relationship. Tells China openly that any other relationship can be strengthened only when we solve these border issues. Let us solve the border issues. Let us finally come to the table and discuss the border issues. As long as this ambiguity remains there on the borders, we are going to witness similar kind of conflicts in the future. Unfortunately, so many innocent lives would be lost also. We should, for once all, we should come out with a very objective, tangible solution, not only with China, with Pakistan also. We had shown the same kind of foresightedness and visionary skills when we have redrawn our borders with Bangladesh. We have given some villages and we have taken some of them. It was done in a very peaceful manner. So why can't we think of that kind of solution with other neighbors, especially more problematic neighbors like China and Pakistan? Otherwise, there is always this threat of China and Pakistan coming together, attacking India both on the eastern and western fronts simultaneously. There is ever this danger of both of them coming together, which they are already doing also. So it is better for India's strategic interest that we must define the borders. In the process, if we have to give up rights on some land, so be it, because that is a small price that we have to pay, or we can pay for much larger peace. This is another major policy initiative that India can think of. Next, what else India can do? What else India should do? Next thing is there must be better coordination between different units of army, as well as the three wings, army, navy and air force. Recently we had come out with the solution, but we require much better coordination and with lot more emphasis on intelligence gathering at the ground level. These are all the proactive measures which we should be taking to make sure that we are not going to witness what we have seen in the last 15 days or so, or 15 days back or so. This is what we can do as part of the present relationship. And of course, in the process, as I said, we should not get unnecessarily emotional. You want to hurt the Chinese interests, but in the process you should not do things in such a manner that your economy will be destroyed. For example, recently the government of India had stalled many of the imports in the ports, especially from China. And what is the consequence? It is only resulting in increase in the prices of medicines, pharmaceutical products. These are all short-sighted measures which only hurt your economy, damage your own system. So India has to be very careful, identify those imports, those products which can hurt China more than India, and send signals. For example, the FDI of China in infrastructure products, let it be reduced. Either you can ban these mobile applications, you can impose restrictions on luxuries. For example, this mobile market. We can encourage the other companies from Southeast Asia in place of Chinese products. We can impose more tariffs on Chinese products to make them less attractive for Indian customers. These are all the measures that we can take. But at the end of the day, as we have mentioned in the beginning itself, we should have a foreign policy that would take into consideration all the aspects: economic, security, defense, then especially related to your neighborhood countries. It should be based more on pragmatism rather than on any kind of ideology. And of course, our government also should focus more on behind the closed door meetings rather than well publicized meetings. They can be a double-edged sword. Right now, everyone is criticizing our Prime Minister, rightly or wrongly, that's a different thing, saying that in spite of the fact that he had invested so much personally, his credibility in Indo-China relationship, the results are completely opposite. So you cannot commit this mistake. You cannot be going so forward that it becomes difficult for you to come back also. Especially when you are dealing with a dangerous neighborhood like China and Pakistan. That was the mistake committed by Atal Bihari Vajpayee. And the same mistake was committed by, again, our present Prime Minister. So you have to be very careful, skeptical, as the Parliamentary Committee report on international relations led by Shashi Tharoor, especially when it has submitted the report last year. It has said that India's China policy should always be guided by healthy skepticism. That is where India should be. Make sure that you are making sure that you are exploiting the interests, economic interests, for your benefit, and at the same time you are extremely cautious while proceeding with other aspects. That is what I think should be about our foreign policy. At the end of the day, I said you have to write only 250 words. What I will do is that I have collected some articles. I will try to put them, in fact most of the things that are there in these articles I have already discussed it, so it's not that much necessary also. Next week we will look at another current affairs topic. Thank you.